John, how are you, man?
Oh, I'm good. Are we recording already? I'm good.
Yeah, we're in. Roger Veer.
All right. Yeah, this is like when these podcasts tell me to put in a name, I just feel some urge to not put my name, so I put that one.
But you didn't have your camera on. When it came up Roger Veer, I was like, had a moment. I was like, what the fuck am I? Has Danny done me here? How you been, man? Anyway, I think it was Prague last time I saw you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing you at the conferences, but I don't think we've actually talked in quite some time.
I know, well overdue. Been trying to do it in person, but haven't been able to make it happen. But I was chatting to Danny this week. I was like, it's long overdue. We spoke to John. There's lots of stuff happening right now, weird shit. And I said, John's the guy we need to talk to. So here we are. So I guess the reason I wanted to talk to you, John, is that despite our toing and froing over the years, I've always held you with massive high regards, especially with how you hold people to very high standards with regards to how they think about Bitcoin, how they treat Bitcoin, how Bitcoin's developed. And recently, I think there's lots happening in the world of Bitcoin, but lots of things that I'm not sure are ultimately good for Bitcoin. I'm almost certain they aren't. And I thought it's time really to get your perspective on these things, because I know you will always put Bitcoin before yourself, and not everyone does. Yeah, ETF is a great example. We'll talk about that. I think a lot of people will be thinking, yeah, great, pump my bags. I mean, even I have to some extent at some point, but I've also tried to question it going, oh, hold on, this just isn't good for Bitcoin. So I think a starting point, you've been around for a long time. You've been in Bitcoin for a long time. You've been deeply involved in it. Like, what's your general perspective of kind of where we are at the moment?
Yeah, you went pretty broad there, but you mentioned ETFs, and I'm pretty vocal about my opinions on various things, and I made it pretty clear that I just don't think it's that interesting, and it's probably just bad for Bitcoin in the long run. I think that, and this taints probably everything in Bitcoin, but there's this whole, like, once you own some, you become like a Ponzi shill, and whether you realize it or not, you're like, a lot of Bitcoiners are programmed to just support something they think will make them worth more. And I think that's the case with the ETF. I don't think there's a lot of thinking going on with people excited about with the ETF, other than I might be able to sell my Bitcoin at a higher price to these new people. And this is just kind of, it's borderline immoral, right? To like only care about that and prioritize that. So as far as that goes, I think that's a corrupting force in a lot of Bitcoin. And yeah, especially with the ETFs, I'm scared that, the ETFs could be used as a way to 1971 Bitcoiners, and a way to like just an angle on Bitcoin for the government. I mean, they don't need more angles. Could also be an angle for major banks to manipulate the price. And I think we'll probably end up with like the white market price and the black market price over time if things like that become very popular.
What's the mechanics of having a white label and black label price?
Well, basically that the supply is higher in one than the other. And so, you're going to have people, you'll have two different economies, or at least two somewhat separatable economies. And you could probably end up with a situation where like paper Bitcoin isn't worth as much because it's harder to verify the quantity of them. And I think that even today, I would guarantee you that we'll have news in coming years about how some places don't have the Bitcoin they're supposed to have. And and you won't learn this until there's a bank run or some other event that causes it to be noticed.
A bit how you warned me a few years ago about BlockFi.
Hey, I'm glad you brought that up. But no, yeah, basically, like you recall that I was probably the only one that like just said I wouldn't come on your podcast anymore. And I held you to that standard, that high standard, in a very blunt way. And I'm glad I did that, because I think I knew it looked a little bit extreme, but I just knew I was right. And I was willing to go to that degree to show it.
No, I mean, totally fair. And again, that's why I always say you're one of the few people I always believe you put Bitcoin before yourself. At the time I was like, what's John on about? Like, this is a successful business. They've got, they've 5 rounds of investment. They're growing. They've got all these products. I didn't see it coming in any way at all. Until it did, and I was like, "Oh fuck, yeah, John was right." Well, you weren't the only one, but you're the only one who refused to come on the show. I think you said you'd have to. The only way I'll come on if there's no BlockFi ads in the show I'm on, which is something I couldn't do at the time, but I totally respect that you did it because you held me to account, and coming on the show obviously would be good if you're promoting a product that you're working on, but you had no interest in that if it meant promoting something that you thought was broken or wouldn't work. So yeah, like I can only respect that.
Yeah, I remember thinking like, I can't be on a show where it starts like use BlockFi, and then in the interview I'm saying don't do things like BlockFi. Like, I don't think BlockFi would want that either. But like, I can't be that degree of hypocrite, you know.
I mean, you could have come on and said that. I wouldn't have censored you. But look, it is what it is. I've learned a very tough lesson with that one. But going back to these ETFs, even if there is a difference in price, do you not believe there'll be an arbitrage that would close that price anyway?
I think it's so funny that you're challenging this when we have GBTC to point at.
Yeah.
Like there obviously was a huge price discrepancy, and there still is some price discrepancy because of that. Now, of course, it has a more extreme circumstance where you actually can't get out of it, and it's not actually like a real Bitcoin ETF. But we don't know what kind of limitations will be on the ones to come. And I just think that there's the only advantage to doing Bitcoin this way is the limitations. It's sort of like CBDCs. Like, the only advantage to a CBDC over a digital fiat is the limits that you can put on it. That's the only feature of it. And so there's just not to go off on another tangent, but I have like bets with people that CBDCs will never take off outside of a communist country. Like, because I just think that, it's another fundamental thing I'm trying to prove. It's just saying the only utility here is for the government, and thus there is no real utility. So the only way you can get people to use it is to force them to use it. And otherwise it just won't be adopted. It's inferior to what people have today.
So do you think that price differential then will be the price of risk? And if so, do you think that price of risk will vary depending on who is operating the ETF? Like, maybe someone would trust a BlackRock custody with Coinbase more than a different ETF.
I think that pricing and risk is part of every product that has a trusted aspect, but I don't think that's necessarily what I meant by the price discrepancy. There's a price discrepancy on every single exchange, if you want to be that specific, because of the fee differences and how hard it is to get money in and out. You see a difference in a few dollars to even $100 between exchanges, maybe even more. What I meant more is that what I said earlier, that the supply will actually be higher, and thus, you'll be able to obtain them more cheaply. And I just don't think that you're going to be able to get every ETF Bitcoin out into real Bitcoin. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons why there's been a delay. Who knows? I mean, I'm not an expert in these things, so I don't know that I'm the best person to speculate, but I'm just trying to use what I've learned about Bitcoin and economics in the 11 years that I've cared. Yeah, I have no use for it. So I just think of it as, well, somebody has a use for it, and it's not the end user. So it's going to be something underhanded probably.
So really it's more about why just hold the asset custodied by somebody else when we have something here that has been invented where you can custody it yourself. And if we can't do anything about the ETFs, because look, if they're going to come, they're going to come. You or I cannot stop it. So what is it we should be doing? Just providing better education to people that they shouldn't be buying the ETF. They don't need to buy the ETF. They can buy and hold the underlying asset.
Well, should is a dangerous word. You need a context there. Like, none of us are obligated to do anything. So I would say what you should do is up to you, and you should use the best information for the context that matters. But the fact of the matter is that if you custodial Bitcoin loses all of the qualities of Bitcoin. And so if like when this comes to scale, like when people say custodial forms of, like people are doing a lot of research into different custodial technologies and things like this, I see it all as the banking industry, not the Bitcoin industry. And so like if you want Bitcoin, you have to hold it yourself. Like if you do anything else, then you're not actually using Bitcoin anymore, and you kind of defeat the purpose. So scaling Bitcoin through custodianship, owning your Bitcoin where somebody else holding it for you. Like the only kind of people that should do that are people that are actually literally dependent. Like a child having his parents hold his Bitcoin, or somebody with mental disabilities, whatever. Like you can hold your own Bitcoin, and if you care about Bitcoin, you should.
You say that you don't get all the qualities of Bitcoin, but I guess the people who will be buying this are really who want one quality, which is the upside. They don't really care about the fundamental principles of.
Well, they want price exposure. At least you could say it a little bit
Yeah,
nicer. Like they just want price exposure. Um,
yeah.
I have a saying somewhere in my Twitter that people who seek only exposure to Bitcoin's price will always be punished. And I think that will always remain true. It may take time, as like with BlockFi and this kind of thing, but like that's because it's the main use case is to punish people. Like there's just not an actual advantage. And the problem with only holding something for the price is that you're just purely speculating. It's like gambling. And eventually the house wins, right? So you have to think that anytime you're putting a highly speculative asset with its primary, not primary, but most popular use case being speculation, then every once in a while the market's going to come and wipe everybody out. So I think we would probably have a less volatile cycle for Bitcoin if people were more about saving Bitcoin and less about speculating on selling the top and buying the bottom. Maybe the price over time would look more like just an angled line up instead of this wavy thing that happens every 4 years.
Mm. It's interesting because over time, I mean, look, John, when I first got into Bitcoin, I wanted price exposure. That's what I wanted. I wanted this asset that went up, and then it's increasingly become part of how I run my life and my businesses. I mean, I messaged you only recently to explain to you like I had a wallet issue because we do have people who want to pay us in Bitcoin, so we accept it. I also have the need to pay people, and sometimes that's in Bitcoin. I'm off to Africa tomorrow. Obviously, trying to pay someone in Africa for services we need while we're there through the banking system is a complete fail. They've just said, "Can you pay me in Bitcoin?" Yeah, super easy. I have savings protection with my cold storage of both for my podcast, my football team, and personal life. It's not something I use anywhere near as much as I use fiat because most of the people I deal with use fiat. But it's certainly there as something I can use in difficult circumstances, and I also have this kind of like backup should something go wrong with the banking industry, etc. Why do you think that, or these use cases that I have found, have become so hard to sell to people?
You mean, well, it's kind of a loaded
Because
question, I
everyone,
guess.
well, yes and no. But what I'm saying is, when I talk to people about Bitcoin, when somebody comes to me and they're like, I'm obviously the Bitcoin guy around here where I live amongst my friends, and I try to explain to them all the risks of the banking sector and why you should have Bitcoin. Nobody really cares. And then what happens? The price goes up, and I get a bunch of text messages saying, "Is it a good time to buy Bitcoin?" It's really hard to try and explain to people the fundamental risks of the banking system, the fundamental risks within our local currency based on government monetary policy and central bank policy. I cannot seem to be able to convince people. Even when I was out in Argentina, people didn't really want Bitcoin. They wanted Tether on Tron.
So, disclaiming that I don't think that orange pilling people is a virtue. I don't think it's immoral. I just think it's not something everybody should feel some need to do, or like a lot of Bitcoiners feel like there's this like urge that everybody should be trying to orange pill everybody. I guess I can sympathize with that a little bit in that one of the things that Bitcoin doesn't solve is like even distribution. So the longer people wait to understand Bitcoin, the less of an upside advantage you'll have, theoretically. But disclaiming that you don't have to orange pill people. You can just live your life and, talk to people about other things. Were you to try to figure out why this is so hard, I would approach it like a marketing problem. In marketing, your job is to communicate the utility of your product and how it solves specific problems for specific people. And so maybe the way to interface with people if you're having trouble is to first ask them, like, learn some questions you can ask them to probe them about likely problems they have when it comes to finance, money, etc., and then point out to them how, use that as a leveraging, use their actual pain point as a leveraging point to now explain where that pain comes from in the context of fiat and the government, or regulations, or whatever it may be. Because then once you can convince them there's a problem, then they can better understand how this tool, Bitcoin, may be able to address that problem. But there's a lot of nuance here. It's like, I also think that just explaining to people that Bitcoin is for saving is a good way to approach it. You say, any money that you have that you don't need for several years should be stored in Bitcoin. And then you can try to build off of that. But I'm not an expert in orange pilling people either, so I don't know that I have all the answers so much as how I would approach the problem. But how I'm approaching the problem actually is by having a whole company and building an ecosystem of products to try to make sure, that there's easy stuff to use with good design and this kind of thing. So I don't go the direct route. I don't try to orange pill people, other than like my dad, who I still haven't convinced. And so I'm not that great at it,
After all this time, you still haven't convinced your dad. I've convinced my dad, but he doesn't buy it. He just tells me the price every day.
Well, I think he doesn't think I'm crazy. I think that he's just not a computer guy. And so the idea of him like sitting down with an app and understanding the Bitcoin core node, or even the idea of getting him to make an exchange account and put money in it, like, this is just past him. Like, he's just he only has a smartphone because he can't have a dumb phone anymore. Like, it's not, he's just not a computer guy.
So what is it that drives you then, John? Because you are quite different from most Bitcoiners. Like, what is it internally that's driving you with this?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I thought it was obvious, and I thought it was obvious to everybody. Like, what drives me is that, like, I like freedom and I do not like being constricted in any way. I don't even like the notion of it. If I don't like being told what to do, I especially don't like being told what I can't do. And these are things, whatever happened in my upbringing and in my life, these are things I'm extremely sensitive to. And Bitcoin really harmonizes with this part of me, where I'm anti-authoritarian. Like, I'm just scared of any government official. I see a cop and I go the other way. Like, and I'm not even a criminal. Like, I just don't want that world to affect my world, so I try to keep the world separated. And Bitcoin helps me do that. And because Bitcoin helps me do that and helps me be free in an economic way and have my money and my savings be mine and nobody can stop me, and not only does it appeal to me, but it makes me think, like I kind of was saying a little bit earlier, there is maybe some obligation to help other people that want this tool and, make them be able to use it. And I think that, including myself, humans are just really dumb about a lot of things. And so I behave even passionately on Twitter, like Bitcoin error log and correcting people all the time. It is just my nature. Like, it's not a personality or a strategy. It's just what comes in my head, and it's what I type. But there's obviously a theme there. Like, I like to correct people because it's not because I want to be superior. It's because I don't like being wrong, and I don't think other people like it either. And so I'm trying to help them stop being wrong and stop looking stupid, because we're all, including myself, inclined to like behave in certain unhealthy ways as humans. And that can be like cheerleading things that'll make us rich just because they might make us rich, whatever it may be. Like, we don't stop and think, and humans' critical thinking skills are about one level deep most of the time. And that really frustrates me, because like, I think humans have like so much potential. And if you just go a little deeper anytime you get a chance, you can just be better and have a better life and be more useful. I don't know. That's just a rant, but
no, it's good. I love it, John. This is why, like I say, I'm not going to keep blowing smoke in your direction the whole time we talk. But even despite our disagreements, there's kind of like 3 people I constantly go and check their Twitter at certain times to see what their views are on things. You're one of them. Pierre's another one, and Parker Lewis, and for different reasons. But as I get a little bit older in the world of Bitcoin and want to make less mistakes because I've done a lot of stupid shit, there's certain people I look to for that.
Yeah, those guys are more classy than me.
Yeah, don't worry about it. We're still here. We're still talking. But that freedom thing. So you first time I think we spoke was, I think it was about 5 years ago, maybe 5.5 years ago. Like the world has changed a lot in those 5.5 years, John. It's definitely closed in on us. It certainly feels like we are heading and trending more authoritarian. I just see in my own country here the bullshit that we're dealing with. As the economic situation gets worse, it feels like the walls close in us even more. And Bitcoin is one thing whereby we can try and protect ourselves, protect our wealth, just from the hard work we do. Even that's something they're trying to attack. And I guess that must be, for somebody like yourself who is so anti-authoritarian, so pro-freedom, seeing those walls close in, that must be a challenging thing to live through.
If COVID lockdowns had gone down any longer, I would have gone to a doctor to get a prescription to not wear a mask. And not because I'm an asshole, but because I would have needed him to do that for me to be able to stay healthy. Like when I would have to wear a mask and with no choice in situations, after about 10 minutes, I would start getting anxiety. And after about 15 minutes, I'd start wanting to like fight people. Like I'd feel like violent, like I needed to hit something. Like it is not for me, like constricting me and doing that to me. Like that would have heavily radicalized me had I gone too much longer. Like, I don't know what kind of person I would become if the world becomes more and more like that.
Going back to some of the things that have been happening in Bitcoin, another thing that's been pushed quite heavily over the last, I think it's about 6 months to a year, is ordinals. I've been fairly neutral in that I think it's stupid, like completely stupid. I've never inscribed anything. I never will. I have no interest in wasting time in these things. But it's funny, like with Bitcoin, over time, new things arrive and they split the crowd. And we seem to get more and more fragmented. And people that I felt like I agreed with on certain issues are suddenly pro-ordinals, where I'm, like I said, I'm neutral, but I think they're stupid. I don't want to tell people what they can do with block space, but I think they're stupid. So I kind of got 2 questions relating to that. Firstly, I do want to know what you think about ordinals specifically, but also as we fragment more and more, how do we kind of protect the base ethos of Bitcoin? Because continual fragmentation feels like it's dangerous for Bitcoin.
Well,
because we at least if you would go back to maybe the block size wars, that was probably one of the first big fragmentations, right? But the community was pretty cohesive after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way to prevent it is to be more conservative across the board. A lot of people will now hyper respond to this and say, "Oh, you're saying ossify Bitcoin," and I said, "No, I said be conservative." And there's a lot of different aspects of the culture that are missing as far as how to properly be a conservative Bitcoiner. And we're kind of right now flirting with the opposite side of the spectrum, where there's a lot of culture for complexity, a lot of culture for soft forks and new proposals, and then there's other kind of phenomena in there where, like you mentioned, the community kind of splits and decides on things as it's presented to them. I feel like there's a whole culture and section of Bitcoiners that, because they don't have an actual way to interface with Bitcoin, like to contribute to it as a builder or contribute to it as a orange pillar or contribute to it as a developer, they because they're so invested, both literally and mentally, they have to contribute somehow. And subconsciously, they do this by by designating themselves as tastemakers, as part of a clique that gets to decide what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And you've you've been on the other side of me behaving this way, for example. You've been on the other side of it with a lot of people. But it's become pretty much toxic. It's become something where the people feel that they're so good at figuring out who to trust that they can be knee-jerk about these decisions, and they can be heard. They have a herd mentality where it's like, oh, this is the thing today on Twitter, and this guy are supporting it. Okay, let's go and let's support the shit out of this, and let's make it a thing, and let's make all the memes. Let's make it. This thing's going to have its own memes, and you get this whole like subculture per proposal. And it's just obnoxious, honestly. It's very unhealthy for Bitcoin and Bitcoiners, in my opinion. And so I think that we need more of a culture of conservatism, and we need to be much more scared of complexity. And so that's kind of the laying the groundwork for my answer about ordinals. Look, we've been able to do tokens on Bitcoin, NFTs on Bitcoin. Bitcoin, like a Bitcoin transaction, and Bitcoin just like has these unique, things that you can anchor to. It's just abstracted cryptographic information, abstracted money, abstracted, transactions. You can anchor anything to them. It's how Tether was born, right? Like it used the Omni layer, and the Omni layer used op returns to encode special data that could be decoded off chain to manage tokens. We had all this stuff. We even had embedding data into the blockchain. And then it kind of came back because there was like this shitcoiner envy thing that Bitcoiners have. Some Bitcoiners have a different class. And they feel like, how do we get the shitcoiners? How do we get all that investment in shitcoin? How do we get all of that dev mind share in shitcoins? How do we get that over here? And so they're always trying to replicate quote unquote successes from the shitcoin side on Bitcoin. But they all came from Bitcoin in the first place most of the time. And so it's just this stupid circle where everybody's kind of trying to figure out how to get rich off of each other. And it causes a bunch of silliness. So as far as ordinals, I'll tell you, one great thing that ordinals did is remind everybody that blocks are going to be full. Whether they're from ordinals or whether you think ordinals is an attack or just a temporary fad or whatever you may think, the blocks are going to be full, and that has a lot of negative effects on things like Lightning and other proposals. So I think that's another thing to consider. Is it's always nice to have these stress tests, but yeah, I agree with you that they're stupid. That they are mostly supported and continue to thrive because of toxic people like Eric Wall and Udi and the Taproot wizards. Like, these are not people that are trying to help people. Like, these are not people that are trying to solve for freedom. That's not what's going on there. And I think that's very clear. And you don't have to care about those things, but those are not cultures I can take seriously and people that I can trust. And so I just see a lot of reason to ignore what they're doing and certainly not support it. Some people even think there's reason to try to kill what they're doing, and they make ordinal disrespectors and things like this. I don't know. I'm just going to stay out of it because I have too much work to do and too much stuff I want to make. So I'm just not as involved in being dramatic about these things anymore, because I learned they all just go away eventually anyway. And so I don't need to worry about fighting some of these things. I'm more worried about fighting battles with core devs and Lightning builders and people that are actually peers, that I would consider peers. So yeah, ordinals, I don't know if we can do anything about it, but we need to assume blocks are going to be full anyway and figure out the repercussions of that.
So you don't think it's damaging? It's just an annoyance?
Well, the thing is, I respect any innovation attempt that doesn't require complexity of the base layer. And so they were able to do ordinals without a soft fork, right? Just like BitVM, it was it's something you can do without a soft fork. And I need to encourage that kind of research, because I think that there's still unmined ideas there. There's plenty more that people can do with the Bitcoin that they have already, especially considering, how little Taproot's been used. And ordinals do show that, here's one way we can play around with what we've got. So I like that. Yeah, I don't know. I do think that there's also a small chance, like I didn't mean my answer to come out as positive for ordinals so much as I don't have a problem with research, and I think that there is a possibility that people may find ordinals or some aspect of some offshoot of that world. A real use case might come through for normal Bitcoiners, whether it be to anchor something by using an ordinal method. Now, maybe once we figure out the ordinals, we'll figure out a cleaner way to do it without them. Who knows? But in the end, you can't really call somebody evil for using the Bitcoin that we have.
I tweeted out recently, John, that I think I have 3 uses for Bitcoin, which is sending Bitcoin to people, receiving Bitcoin from people, and storing Bitcoin in either a single signature or multi-signature wallet, whereby my multi-sig is a deep cold storage, and I have a single sig just for day-to-day Bitcoin, and I need that on the base chain and Lightning. To this day, I have no other use for Bitcoin. I've never used it in any other way.
That is what Bitcoin is. Those are the use cases of Bitcoin. Yes,
I know. But it's leading me to a point: is that's all I've used Bitcoin for, and I send Bitcoin multiple times per week now. I'm not sure if I do it daily, but certainly multiple times per week. I would have thought I'm sending and receiving daily across all my businesses, certainly as we have e-commerce for the football team, so people can pay for buying shirts and things with that. But that's my only use, right? And so I'm constantly questioning where is all the dev required? What are all these developments required that can maybe add this extra layer of risk to Bitcoin? And I think about your fostering more conservatism. I've told you about this multiple times, that during the block size wars, I had no idea what was going on, but I did start reading the mailing list. And on there were some people who it almost felt like they'd given up and accepted that that the split was going to happen, that the upgrade, was going to happen. Yet you were in there fighting and go, no. You when other long-term Bitcoiners were just kind of almost accepting the work that had to be done. You were like, no, constantly. And I can't remember if it was you or somebody else around the time said the thing was, at the time, it felt like a massive attack on Bitcoin, and this could really risk and damage the value of Bitcoin as a network and then value of the Bitcoin that you hold. And so I keep thinking about my use cases for Bitcoin. I don't need anything else. It may be someone will say there's some things that need to be doing to make those sending, receiving, and storing better. But at the moment, I have no need. So I fully support more conservative Bitcoin. So then my question really is to you is how do we, or how do you, or should we be doing something to try and foster a more conservative approach?
I mean, again, should is a dangerous word because it assumes it assumes you know better than other people, which while I do behave that way all the time, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. It's just a theory. But it's certainly a easier to digest and defend theory than complexity and change. And so I think that there's a lot of nuance in the culture going on there. For example, you mentioned the mailing list. The culture of the mailing list has evolved a lot since then, for the worse. It's basically a place where the main useful people don't really talk that much, the real veterans, and the newer crop of people that have come in the past 3 years or so. They are just constantly trying to find ways to boost each other's complexity. And so you'll get these factions of people that support, that want the CTV fork or want the APO fork, or they want this to be formally accepted as a BIP or that to be formally accepted as a BIP. And it's just it's become, to some people, they feel like this is their main vessel for trying to get the change in Bitcoin that they want. And the problem there is that what I've learned from dealing with them is that engineers aren't trying to solve your problems. They're trying to solve their problems, and what their problems are either a highly specific power user, thing that they just want to be able to do, themselves, literally themselves. They don't care whether you need it or not. Or they're trying to create an environment where they have more opportunity to create more things. So it's like they want CTV so they can make this, and this. It's not they want CTV so we can solve this problem Bitcoiners have, or we can solve this limitation of Bitcoin that is costing people or harming people or keeping people out. That's not what they're trying to do. It's just always, well, if we had this, then we could do that. And if we could do that, then we could do that and that. And it just becomes like this playground for them. And they just want to play. And they try their best to make this appropriate and, and have narratives for why this would be useful to normal people. But if you look closely, you'll see, as you've noticed, all people really need is to send, receive, and store Bitcoin. And if you want to anchor something to that, do it off chain. And that's really the responsible options. The problem with the block size wars was it wasn't that we thought it was back then. I think it's less this than in hindsight. We thought it was the businesses want to control Bitcoin of the people, and the businesses are stepping in as a coalition, and they're going to try to take Bitcoin from us. And they kind of were trying that. That was like they wanted to fire core, and they had this New York agreement, and it was like all these startups and stuff. That kind of was part of it, and that's where all the support came from. But that wasn't really that dangerous. And I actually think Bitcoiners, especially protocol engineers, should have much better relationships with merchants and businesses and the people on the ground. And that would probably help fix their culture a little bit too. The problem was that they were proposing a hard fork. And that's what we had to defend against, and why I was so vehement about how I felt about things, because I understand that there's no such thing as hard forks. You can only make a copy of Bitcoin and hope everybody switches to the copy. And that is an extremely dangerous proposition that I don't think you could ever predict the outcome for. So until we can make some sort of acceptable deterministic method for hard forking, hard forks just don't actually exist and just aren't actually an option. There's just making a new shitcoin, trying to call it Bitcoin. That's the option. And we saw how that goes, right?
So any scenario right now which requires a hard fork, you personally ultimately reject?
Yes.
Almost.
I think
99.999%.
Well, I don't have to reject it. It just is rejected.
You mentally reject it.
Well, no, it's rejected by Bitcoin too. Like you can't if you hard fork things, you're just saying there's going to be two Bitcoins, or but really the most realistic way to look at it is a hard fork is a copy of Bitcoin. Like Bcash is a copy of Bitcoin, but everybody didn't adopt it, so the hard fork didn't work. And that's how every hard fork is until somebody designs something better. And we have to have that pressure on the design, because I think it probably could be designed, something could be designed better. But what will happen is people won't like the results, that it takes an extremely long time to get it to switch. Like it might take 20 years to hard fork Bitcoin, like to go from initiating the hard fork and actually pulling it off, because you need everybody to agree. Like literally everybody. And then if you don't agree, you need some way of cutting off the people, but at least when you fork Bitcoin directly, people get a copy of both forks. So you don't really strand the original people. Whenever they do come back, they still have their Bitcoin on the new fork too, but anyway, this is just theoretical fork stuff.
Well, unless they sell it.
Right. Yeah.
Like some people did during the Bcash fork.
Well, I mean, the smarter or more experienced Bitcoiners sold their Bcash before the Bcash fork, like on Bitfinex and through the future stuff. But yeah,
this culture issue amongst devs, is this because maybe some of the more experienced devs are tired? 8 to 10 years is a long time in Bitcoin. You have to go through a lot of battles. You get a lot of battle scars. I even feel it myself sometimes. I'm like, fucking hell, how much longer am I going to do this for and be shouted at for and argue with people? And they are the kind of other side of the coin, is that they've got younger people who may be trying to make a name for themselves, want to leave their mark on Bitcoin. Is that part of the cultural problem?
Well, I don't think, like I said earlier, the older, more veteran people, you don't see this kind of behavior from. But they are pulling back a bit. They're not as vocal. They're not publishing as many things, and they're kind of just trying to keep their nose clean and not get sued by Craig Wright. I think that if that phase passes, maybe things will shift back again. But it does kind of seem like there's been a shift, or at least there's a slow shift to a new guard, and it is a younger guard, and it is a younger guard with something to prove. And I apologize to any core devs that feel like I'm talking about them when I shouldn't. This doesn't apply to everybody, but it is definitely a problem that I see. And they can call me ignorant and that I don't really know what's happening. But I do have several core dev friends that I talk to in private that will say things that they will only say in private and won't say publicly, that make me know that I'm not crazy.
And these younger, maybe newer core devs who are trying to get things through, can they actually get things through now? Will it be possible for a BIP to get through that maybe more veteran, experienced core devs dislike? How does the consensus on these ideas work?
The issue we have is the threat of a Manhattan Project type of change, where you have multiple different parts that can assemble in the future to do something more dangerous or more meeting that developer's agenda. A good example would be, I fought really hard against the mempool full RBF change. I did a interview with Marty Bent about it, where I went into detail about it.
I watched it.
And the people that watched it said, "Oh, John's not crazy. He makes sense. I know what he's talking about." They didn't actually come out and support me, but they did, get it to some degree. And I didn't even cover all of the angles in that interview. There were more that were very valid as well. But I did cover them all, like in the threads in Bitcoin Core and arguing with the core devs and their friends. So like it just didn't work. Like I wasn't part of the clique and I couldn't stop it. I lost the train of thought of what question I was answering. Sorry.
Well, no, it's. I was asking, really, can younger devs get things through without
I was
the support
saying
of
the
more
Manhattan
veteran
Project
devs?
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the problem, like, this isn't a good example because I knew what would happen and why I had to stop it, because I knew that basically there is a subculture in Bitcoin Core that actually just wants to kill zero confirmation payments and make sure people doesn't do them. But the problem is this is a use case, and and devs have certain rules about not invading the user space or corrupting the user space. And this is basically saying don't break a current use case when you make changes to the code. And if you do, make sure you're addressing it in some intentional way. And mempool for RBF breaks Bitcoin in a way that it basically says if you ever want to signal a special way to treat your transaction, it just gets ignored by this policy. It just says do this instead. And now their justification for this is that, well, the game theory says this is what will always happen anyway. But game theory is kind of bullshit. And what I saw was they're going to put this change in there and they're going to say, it's off by default, John, calm down. We're just giving people an option. We're giving them more freedom. We're giving them a feature. But in the process, what they were actually doing was taking away the zero conf feature. And I even proposed, let's add a zero conf flag so you can tell nodes when I have this flag on, don't replace the transaction. But I knew what was going to happen was they were going to push this through, and they did push it through, in my opinion, in a kind of underhanded way. They pushed it through. Basically, they made the claim that I was the one trying to change Bitcoin because this proposed change was already in the release candidate that hadn't gone public yet. And so because it was already in Bitcoin code but run by no one, I was the one asking to change Bitcoin by asking them to revert this change. And I knew what would happen is that there would eventually be proposals to turn it on by default, and then ZeroConf would be permanently dead. And so, this is what I mean by Manhattan Project. Like you can put in something that's, oh, this is just a feature. This is just a soft fork. This is just a new thing you can build with, when you know the plan later will be to engage that thing or use that thing in a way that meets only your agenda or a minority agenda. And that's the biggest problem here is Bitcoin being able to be changed by minorities. That's the scary part.
So that sounds to me like a significant risk that exists within Bitcoin now.
Yeah, I mean it's a risk, but it's not a risk. You can't like blame Bitcoin Core because they're building Bitcoin Core. You have to blame Bitcoiners for this lack of conservative behavior. Like Bitcoiners shouldn't run the latest version of Core ever. Like everybody should be running a version of Core that is 6 to 12 months old, just as a security practice. You may even want to think about only running the version that's before the last soft fork, like run a pre-Taproot node. And wait 5 years. Like there's lots of conservative, ways you could look at it. But because Bitcoiners just trust Bitcoin Core, and because they trust them so much that there's no competition to Bitcoin Core, alternative implementations, at least none that are significant. There are some that exist, like the Bitcoin. Then we just kind of have this trickle down trust system where it's like, okay, well, I trust these influencers, and these influencers trust these devs, and these devs trust these core devs, and these core devs trust these veteran core devs. And now you have like this trust-based distribution system for change. And there's not a lot of auditing or even understanding of what the changes are.
Again, I'm sorry I'm going around in circles here, but it feels like there needs to be a way to communicate and have back on the agenda a more conservative approach to Bitcoin. And why? I just don't know how you do it. Do you have to build some kind of coalition of people who recognize these risks and talk about it? Does that already exist? Because I'd hate for us to sleepwalk into, as you say, a Manhattan style update.
Well, it's a culture problem, and I don't know how to fix those kinds of problems. I do my own style on Twitter, and I try to inform people, and I try to be very direct about it. And I do podcasts, and I make products and stuff. But like, I'm just one person, and the thing is, this is nobody's job. Like, it's nobody's job to figure out how to protect Bitcoin at the cultural level. And I'm not sure if it were somebody's job that they could be very good at it. You might say that, if there are people that listen to this and feel motivated, there are probably ways that Core could improve the situation. Like I'm just thinking out loud, but like something like when they release a new version of Core, they could call it like Core Preview, and they could tell people, don't run this until this date. You know what I mean? It's experimental. Don't run it. Like they could have more of a conservative approach to how they present their work and how they distribute their work. But yeah, I don't really know the answer, honestly.
Could it be also that there's a significant percentage of people who are influential within Bitcoin who aren't actually running Core at all, who aren't even running a node? So they are storing their Bitcoin on some kind of multi-sig or hardware wallet solution where they're bypassing nodes, they're using somebody else's nodes, and so they're not thinking at that level.
I don't know that how much it matters or whether they are doing that, so much as I would zoom out a little further and say, I agree that there are definitely very influential people in Bitcoin that don't actually understand how Bitcoin works, that only look at the narratives that suit them, or the narratives that like get them more likes or more followers or more support. Like toxic or negative or critical narratives are antiviral. Like nuance is antiviral. That's a quote from Sergey, from Bitrefill. Like I was having some conversation with him about some frustrations I was having, and he was saying, nuance is antiviral. That's why memes are viral. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And that sucks. But it's true. Like people don't cheerlead you for pointing out that there's a flaw in something.
Is there anything I could be doing to help support this more?
I think if you practice it, you will end up, in the culture, and you will end up behaving in that cultural way, and you will end up making more people behave that way. So yeah, I think there's probably something you could do. You could talk about it. You could say, hey, I finally updated my core node today from 23 to 24, even though it's on 28 now. And it's just this is how you should do it. Like, you can have more guests that talk that way, but it's not really a very popular idea. Like, mostly people want to talk about ossification or what the next fork is. Like, there's not this nuance, this area of nuance where people are like, oh, just be more careful, guys. Just reject everything by default and then only care. Like, for example, you should never accept a Bitcoin change if it doesn't fix a problem that you have. There's just no reason. Like, if that new soft fork doesn't contain something that you need, why would you support it?
Didn't that Romanian guy who apparently drowned, some people said he didn't drown, but drowned in Costa Rica, I don't know him. You will know him because you've been around a lot longer than me, but wasn't he running the very first version of Bitcoin the whole time? And he thought every upgrade to Bitcoin was an attack?
Not exactly.
Is that true or a myth?
Some of that is true. Some of it is mistelling of the stories. So yes, he was very conservative. He was extremist in that regard. And yes, and also that's a big part of where I learned about Bitcoin was with him. So I was part of that. I was part of that community in the early days, and that was where I hung out in Bitcoin, was with him and people like him. And so I did kind of find my people, luckily, very early. But he didn't run the oldest version of Bitcoin. What he did was he made his own implementation of Bitcoin, or he paid some people to make it, called the Real Bitcoin, I think it was called. And the website probably still exists if you look for it. But it wasn't really that well maintained, and it wasn't really a serious project because it just needed a lot more love, a lot more attention, a lot more, devs. But it existed. And he also did things like he threatened to kill, I think, or he put a hit out on Peter Woolley or something like this. I forget all the details.
Yeah,
But the thing is, a lot of people didn't really understand him. Like, he wasn't actually putting a hit out on him. It's more like performance art. He was trying to show everybody the obnoxiousness of the situation and how obnoxious he thought the proposal was. And so, yeah, I would say he was definitely a conservative worth mentioning. And I wouldn't go so far as to say you should run the oldest version of Bitcoin. It won't work. It will require a lot of hacks to get. I think the oldest version you could get working is like 0.8 or something like this. I think Maxwell got it running a few years ago. But yeah, I'm just saying something like, a certain amount of time that you wait before doing an upgrade, like a significant amount of time, or a certain snapshot in time, like I said, like before the last soft fork, this kind of thing. And this kind of behavior would also force Core to better support older versions, because what happens is they don't do versioning where they add new things to older versions. So you kind of eventually have to use the new thing. If they fix some kind of CVE or CVE bug or something like this, you eventually end up with no choice but to accept all the soft forks. So yeah, if you had 20% of people only running a pre-taproot version, when they made updates, they would make them to that version too. Things would just be different in a lot of ways.
I do want to talk about Synonym, what you've been working on for the last, feels like about 3 years. Is that about right?
It was March 2020 that we started, and we announced the company about a year after that, or 2 years after that, actually. Yeah.
And I have the wallet on my phone. I downloaded it when I met you in Prague, and I really liked it. I'm kind of excited by the idea of it coming out of test flight. But before we get into that, there's a couple of things I want to tee it up with first, but I think might add some context. Specifically, what happened with Wallet Satoshi being removed from the US App Store. I think possibly with all the regulation that's coming in and what happened with Binance, which, by the way, I wouldn't have cheerleaded in any way at all, even though I'm not a fan of Binance. It feels like people are now taking preemptive action to avoid situations where they could face their own legal difficulties in the US. What did knowing what you're working on developing, and if you want to tee that up by explaining it to the listeners, what was your read of the Wallet of Satoshi situation?
Well, I didn't mean to, but I think I had the most popular reply because I started reading the replies and it was all people asking why. And I read those replies and I'm thinking, did you even think why? I mean, ask yourself why and you try to figure out why. But I shared with them my version of that, which is Wallet of Satoshi simply, and they didn't tell me this. They didn't disagree with it either. I don't have a relationship with them. I don't talk to them. I don't know them. But my assessment of the situation is they got a lawyer, and the lawyer let them know that they were doing something illegal, and he said you should probably stop. And they couldn't justify internally any way to continue that. They couldn't find a way to contradict the lawyer that made sense, so they stopped. That's what happened. Because that's what happens to me when I try to make products and I try to add services and business models within those products. I have lawyers and I have to deal with them, and our lawyers are the strictest in the world. They're Tether's lawyers. And so I've been through this. I know exactly what happened to Wallet of Satoshi, probably. I am guessing, I am speculating, but the other side of this is like Bitcoiners wanted to like figure out how to put this through the mill, like they had to digest it and decide what they thought about it, like we were talking about earlier. And they were like, oh, this is part of a crackdown on the US from the US. The Apple Store is trying to stop it. It's like, no, dude, like they weren't removed. They voluntarily removed it. They told you that themselves. And so there's a reason. And the reason is that they were operating illegally, most likely. And that's why you don't see a lot of people offering custodial Lightning wallets, because it's not legal to do that in most countries. At least there are limits to even if you do it. Like some countries will let you do it under $1,000 or under a certain amount per day or whatever, or a certain amount per user at any given time. There's all kinds of ways that you can try to design something that will stay within the bounds but not have to do KYC. But it's a limited spectrum. It's very limited. So yeah, with Wallet of Satoshi, I think that's all that happened. I think this is just another cultural issue in Bitcoin, but not just in the Bitcoiners, but also the builders. They just don't think about that, like they need a lawyer. And most of them do. And they don't realize that if they ask their lawyer, they're going to say stop and that they're going to be right. And it's not that I agree with government regulations. I hate them. It's not that I think that, it's not that I'm a bootlicker. It's that I don't want to go to prison, and I don't want my life to be one that has to worry about going to court, responding to lawyers. I also don't want my life to be one that's complying. Like that's why I don't want to like get a license to be able to offer LSP services to Americans or these kinds of things. I don't want my job to be working for the government or fearing the government. I want to make cool things for cool people, And I think that Wallet of Satoshi is going to have to do something. I doubt what they're doing is fully legal in Australia either. I think they work out of Australia. So there's probably more change coming from them, I would expect, and other people like them.
In some ways, though, like even though we would agree on disagreeing with over-regulation, in some ways that regulation is now forcing or raising up the kind of products that you or I would want people to use in Bitcoin, which is non-custodial.
That's a loaded one. So first of all, you're implying that we would disagree. You're implying that we would disagree on regulation?
I think we'd agree.
Yet. Oh, okay.
No, I'm saying we would agree that we would agree that we disagree with the overregulation.
Okay.
Of products.
And you're saying that stress is a great motivator, necessity creating invention.
Yeah, Bitcoin is meant to be something that circumvents government regulation policy. That's the basis of the decentralized nature of Bitcoin.
I have to agree with you. I agree.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel good to agree with that, but it is true. Like, because I have literally invented things because of not wanting to talk to my lawyers. Like I've invented better ways to do things for our own technologies or protocol, like stuff with slash tags and whatever. Like we've invented things that were like, oh, if we do it this way, then we won't have to worry about legal. Like,
yeah, it's not a mark on your character to when we occasionally agree.
Yeah, well, it is. It shows that I can't agree with ideas, and it's not about people.
Well, maybe take it as a compliment, and maybe it's that you've had more influence on me and made me realize these things. But yeah, so it's forcing people to use the right kind of products, to use Bitcoin in the way that I don't want to say should, but in an ideal world of Bitcoin, to be circumventing government regulations, rules of state, to be able to be to self-custody your Bitcoin, circumvent the state. Like it's forcing us towards having these types of products. It's a bit like if you look at the exchanges that have been under pressure from regulations, it's the exchanges which have been trading securities. We've seen Kraken, Binance recently face legal difficulty. I don't know if it's coming for Coinbase, but certainly we haven't ever seen River or Swan under any pressure there at the moment. And so, there is like this, I don't even know how to put it, but it's kind of like, it's a forcing function to be using Bitcoin in the way it's originally meant to be designed.
Yeah, the problem is that boils down to the everything is good for Bitcoin meme, and that's just not actually true. Like,
of course,
is every time I punch you in the face good for you? Well, yeah, because your face is going to get more used to it, and you'll have more bruises, and maybe more. I'll kill more nerves, so it won't hurt so much, and maybe you'll learn to fight and then hit me back, and so yeah, every time I punch you, it's good for you, right?
But you could kill me.
I mean, right. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. It sucks to live through it. You could have serious financial loss due to it. Like, not everything is good for Bitcoin. So saying that, yes, adapting to stress is a positive way to deal with stress. Sure. So inventing something to fix your problems, yes. But being stressed is not a good state to be in. So, how do you look? Most of our goals are to relieve stress, right? It's to say, I want more freedom, so I have less stress, so I have more mobility, more security in the mental sense.
Well, explain what you're doing with Synonym for people listening, then, because not everyone will know or will have heard of the project you're working on, and explain therefore the kind of ethos of the company and what it is you're building.
Sure. Yeah, it has been a while since I've talked about it in general. I haven't done a lot of podcasts this year. And I haven't talked to your listeners in a long time. So just to remind everybody who might be interested, so Synonym is working on this concept that we call the atomic economy. And it's basically our vision for a post-Bitcoin, digital economy. And so it's more than just trying to do the whole hyper Bitcoinization thing. It's about trying to actually create a mental model for, like, okay, sure, Bitcoin kills big tech, it kills big banks, it kills big state. Now, what replaces those things? What are we doing instead? And when you replace those things aren't just banks. In other words, the literal custodianship aspect. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes on there with finance and marketplaces and economies and social media. And it touches everything in the internet. And so I think that we need to actually be able to demonstrate, like when we say to a shitcoiner, don't do that, use Bitcoin, we have to point them at what to do instead. Like, don't do Web3, do this. Don't do, NFTs, do that. Like, we can't just be haters. We have to actually provide, some sort of advice with our criticisms. And that's what Synonym is trying to do, is say, okay, here is actually an entire vision and suite of products and services where you could actually visualize a post-Bitcoin world. And so we build various software products with certain Bitcoin related in some cases, and then peer-to-peer web related in other cases, services built in. And then we also build some protocol stuff and work on some protocol stuff. Our main product at the moment is BitKit, a mobile wallet app that supports a self-custodial wallet app that uses Bitcoin, Lightning, and slash tags. Slash tags is kind of like our way of rebuilding the web. It's basically a new web that is all key based. And the idea there being that instead of anchoring to IPs or anchoring to email addresses or anchoring to your government ID, whatever method, you just use keys like public private key pairs like Bitcoin does, but not Bitcoin keys, a different kind of key. And you attach all kinds of use cases to these keys. It's not just about identity. It's a lot more. It's about a whole web that is key based. In a whole digital economy that is key based. And so BitKit supports and displays some of the early features of how we would deploy some of these web features. Like we have being able to we're the first ones to do pay to contacts. And behind the contacts, there's a feature called /pay, which basically lets you abstract as many different payment methods as you want behind one key. So you can have static keys where you do matching across payment types. So for example, say your wallet supports /tags, but your wallet has support for PayPal payments, credit cards, and Lightning, and nothing else. And then my wallet supports Bitcoin, on-chain, and Lightning, and nothing else. Well, when I try to pay you, automatically in the background, the Lightning payment method will find each other and make the payment. And the user doesn't have to know the difference. They just say, pay you $50 or pay you $50 in Bitcoin, whatever. And it just sees if you have a compatible payment method and just does it. And so it's just a pay to contacts feature that abstracts payment negotiation. We have other features like widgets, which are kind of like a souped up version of RSS feeds where you can pull data from anywhere on the web and show it as a widget inside of the wallet. So we have things like price widgets that come from Bitfinex, and we want to do some other widgets that like come from other people for like block data and stuff like this. But yeah, BitKit is in beta. And you can test it right now on test flight by visiting bitkit.to. You can test it on Android as well. We have the APK available or the Play Store. And what we're doing with BitKit right now is we're kind of preparing for an audit. So we're trying to get the app stable enough to where we're happy with all of the critical components of it and have them audited so we can come out of beta sometime in the spring, hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like Q2 next year, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. We're hoping. Depends how good the audit goes. If the audit finds like significant problems, it might take more work to fix them. Yeah. But if things go relatively well, we're leaving 3 months of space after the audit to respond to the audit and come out of beta. So yeah, we're trying to start that process, within the next month or two, and then finish the process within 3 months afterward. Then we have, as I already mentioned, /tags, which is our kind of web protocol that we're building. I don't want to get too much into that other than to say I talked about it a lot, and mostly it just confuses people to talk about the nuances, and I don't want to confuse people. I'll just say what we're doing right now is we're making a new version of it based on our learnings from kind of using the first version that we made and how things have evolved in the ecosystem. And we're going to demonstrate it through a new product. So rather than tell you what you could do with it, we're just going to show you what you should have done with it. And our hope is to release that product at the end of the year. But I don't know. We're only just starting. So it might take longer than a year or longer than three quarters or so to get the first version out. But our goal, at least, is to release that in the fall next year. And then we have Block Tank.
Let me ask you.
Well. Sorry, but
we'll come to Block Tank. Well, to explain Block Tank, then I'll ask you about that because I've got a question.
Yeah, really quickly. So Block Tank is what helps make the Lightning user experience good in BitKit. It's an LSP, a Lightning Service Provider. So basically, a BitKit user by default, they can open a channel with anybody, but by default, when the interface is trying to open a channel, it's trying to open it with our Lightning node, and our Lightning node is set up to facilitate this and make it a good user experience by being well connected and managing a lot of the complexity for the user while they still get to hold their own keys. And within Block Tank, we also have started the LSP spec group, which has become pretty successful in that most of the industry that cares about LSPs, which is most of the implementation companies and some wallets, attend every 2 weeks, and we have a spec group where we're trying to define an interoperable spec. And our motivation there is we don't want to serve Americans, so we want Americans to use BitKit, but they can't use our Lightning node, and so we want to have an interoperable spec where the user can set whichever LSP they want to, and so this will allow Americans to use BitKit with an American-friendly node.
So is that a bit like Lightspark?
No, I'm not entirely sure
Nothing.
what Lightspark is.
Right.
I'm getting an impression that they're probably going to do some sort of custodial Lightning app. That's my guess. They certainly have the talent and the money to do a self-custodial one, but if they're building a self-custodial one, I haven't heard any murmurs about what they're building with or what they're doing. Maybe they're making a whole new
Okay.
implementation. I have no idea. I honestly don't know that much
Right.
about what they're doing, but I don't have high hopes for what they're doing. The first thing they just released it was like a payment protocol related thing for attaching metadata. It's very much designed in line with like caring about KYC and compliance. And so my guess is they're going to have a much more corporate enterprise angle and a much more custodial angle, and that they're not going to be my guess is they're not going to be attempting to give people self-custodial wallets.
Interesting. So back to slash tags. Tell me if I'm completely off on this, or maybe on the right direction. There's two things that worry me at the moment, John, with relation to AI. So firstly, I have with both, I've got two different multi-sig solutions. I use both Unchained and Casa. And if I lose a key, I can go onto a video call and verify who I am, yada yada. And that obviously is now risky in the world of AI, because we're not far off at all from people being able to take, maybe one of my online videos and use that to take my voice and take my appearance and copy who I am. So that's one fear. Another fear I have is people creating fake content that I didn't create and attributes me saying things that I didn't say. And that's a real issue. When you say you're with keys kind of reinventing the web, does that mean I can all the content I create use slash tags to validate that it came from me?
I mean, you could do that with any key based identity, solution. So it's not something that would necessarily be unique to slash tags so much as you would need to be using software that behaved that way with slash tags. So in other words, for example, if you were making a video, you would have to be using software that embedded your proofs into the video or included them when you were like hashing the whole video and signing it. Like, you'd have to have some method of providing a proof that the video came from a specific key, and you would have to protect that key, and people would need to be running software to, when they watch that video, it's checking the key. So you need to purpose build these things. They could easily be built, but I'm just making the point that just because you have a key that you own doesn't mean that you're necessarily proving things every time you do something, unless the software is set up that way. So yeah, you certainly could have much better integrity, but the areas where you get more integrity in the data that are more interesting, like signing, is something we all assume and know. Like, that's something that you would definitely want to be part of things. But it's more interesting that, like, once you can attach metadata to keys, how you can create contexts, that's more interesting in that regard. In other words, like, there could come a day, like, let's get like experimental with your fear. Like, you're worried somebody will impersonate you, essentially, and it will become very easy to. Well, what if there are 5 Peter McCormicks and nobody's actually really sure which one is the real one anymore? You know what I mean? Like, you're going to end up have to pick the one that you think is the real one, or the one that is most closely matching what you're looking for out of Peter McCormick. You know what I mean? So if, like, Peter McCormick number B is like always talking about the ETF, and you're a finance guy and you love what he has to say about it, you're just going to ignore the other ones because all you care about is how Peter talks about ETFs, And so it's more about, in a world where you don't have certainty, what you need is certainty of relevance. And that's more interesting to me. And, I'm not going to get too much further into it, but that's a big part of what makes slash tags different compared to our approach compared to other things. Is we're much more focused on creating a new web that makes it as easy as possible to establish relevance.
All right. There's two other things I want your perspective on before we finish, because I'm just really interested to see what you think of them. Generally, AI, obviously, it's fast moving. I'm using it nearly daily, mainly ChatGPT and Midjourney, but I'm following some Twitter accounts and I'm just seeing some crazy stuff. And the speed development is insane. And I see opportunity and I see the fear and I see it all. I'm really interested in your perspective.
I agree with everything you said. Like, I use it almost every day in various ways. I find it really exciting. I have notes to myself to use it more because I feel like I'm missing out, even though I'm fully aware of it. Like, I just feel like I need like 2 whole weeks where all I do is play with AI to properly figure out where to put it in my life. Because right now I'm just always feeling like I'm underutilizing it because I see what other people are doing, like coming through in Twitter and stuff. And like not that I'm missing out on this, but it is fun seeing like today's thing is the make it more. Have you seen this? Like,
I saw like did I see like a duck or something make it more crazy?
Make it more
every
silly.
10 likes.
Make it more silly.
Yeah.
That was a duck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they just like, show me a picture of a duck, make it more silly. Okay, make it even more silly. Make it more silly. And they're posting this whole thread of more. And I saw somebody's had a pizza, make it more delicious. And it's just, or ramen, make it more spicy. And they do it more, and it just ends up, every single one ends up with like this crazy intergalactic image of like a big thing consuming a planet. And it's just funny to watch how it plays out. But yeah, I don't feel like I'm missing out there. I'm sure I could recreate that if I wanted, but more like I have a lot of ideas about Bitcoin and how the world works and how, how slash tags will work and this whole new atomic economy concept. And in my experiments playing with feeding these kind of mental models into the AI, in the past when I did it, it was much more limited than now. And I feel like I just really want to sit down with it and see if I can, get some novel stuff out of it. I've plugged some stuff in there where it's told me that this is novel and interesting, and I'm like, oh, okay. And like stuff about like I was like trying to talk about attacks on Bitcoin, and I won't share the attack, but like I was just like, if I did this and this and this, wouldn't this be a way that isn't this a flaw in Bitcoin? And it's like, yes, this is a possible flaw and blah blah blah. Or I had it do an analysis on covenants. I might share that actually, because I used it to do like a whole analysis on covenants and on lightning covenants. And then I got into a debate with Brian Troll's Shinobi in that document about every single point. And I asked him if he would let me just share the whole document. And I think he said yes. I have to double check. But there's just so much you could do to analyze things and like walk around inside of a mental model, or, walk around into the dark areas of a mental model that you can't quite think about easily. There's just a lot you can do there. And I'm excited about it. As far as Synonym, we're not using it in any way currently. We actually do have a call every couple of months to kind of check in. So we have like an AI call where the whole team talks about how each person talks about how they're using it, and we talk about ideas about how maybe we could use it in our products.
Oh wow!
So we're trying to not be ignorant. We have programmers using Copilot and stuff like that, but we have one guy who's like, he made a whole system for translating from his native language to English to respond to comments in Google Docs. And so he's like collaborating with the team using an AI bot.
Love it.
Of course, it annoyed the team at first, but we're giving him some feedback on ways to make it more useful. But like we're paying attention. We don't have any major angle right now. We can see some ways to put it in our next product, but nothing that is like integral. I think that it will become very relevant though with what we're doing with slash tags, because in a way there's aspects of slash tags that are kind of like a caveman's version of an LLM. And so I see that there could be a lot of potential complementary use there.
What about long term though? And not just the AI is going to kill us all narrative that some people are putting forward, but another one I think about is that it moves so quick. Things are happening so fast in AI. It's almost takes the fun out of life in some ways. Like I find AI exciting at the moment, but I also see a future as like it's doing so much for me that and I'm having to try and keep up with it, that life becomes just so pacey that it's it kind of becomes a bit miserable. I don't know if you can understand what I'm trying to say, but
yeah, but
like you said, have that 2 weeks. I'm like, I could do with that 2 weeks, but it's exciting, the technology, but at the same time, it's asking so much of us.
I don't know. You and I are both just about old enough to remember before computers. We're certainly old enough to remember before the internet.
Definitely.
And so I feel like it's more like that to me. It's more like
Right.
everybody's freaking out that computers got invented, and we're going to be able to do all this stuff at home and that we couldn't do before, and typists are going to lose their jobs, and you know what I mean. Like it's just always this doom cycle with a technological revolution, and I do think AI is close to the real deal. In other words, VR was supposed to be a revolution, and that never really became one. It still might. They still keep trying, but it might work. I think they keep trying for a reason. But AI, I think of it like that. It's like, oh, we just reached like a new threshold of powerful tools, and now there are going to be people who embrace them and learn them and become like the new, computer guys. Remember, like the computer guy, like there was always the computer guy, and he's the only one who knew how to do anything with that fucking computer. Well, I was the computer guy, and I had friends that were computer guys, and that's all it is. There's going to be the AI guy. Ask the AI guy; he'll figure it out. He'll ask the AI for you. Like, I don't think this is like the whole doom thing. Like, I don't think this is that the AI is going to take over and turn us all into paper clips. I don't think that AI is going to like cause any special amount more bioweapon development than we already had. It's just, yes, it will make things faster and easier to accomplish, but that's always what technology does. And we have always survived through it, and things have never really looked so different than before it, to where we were like, wow, like we're just different species now. We're just like imagine how we could have never imagined how amazing, like I just don't think that's the stage of AI we're in, at least. I think we're just in here's a really powerful new way of using computers and networks.
Yeah, we'll see on that. Okay, lastly, because I don't know your view on this as well, Nostr. I had Parker Lewis on recently, and he was bearish Nostr. He's like, it's a distraction. Everyone working on Nostr should be working on Bitcoin. It's not really decentralized. Yada yada. I don't really know your views on it.
I have a lot of views on it, and I have to be very careful because of that we make something that some people would consider a competitor to it. I don't know if I quite see it that way. I think it's certainly a competitor for Mindshare, but so what do I think about Nostr? As far as Parker's comments, I don't disagree so much as I think most people's comments about Nostr, including the people that love it, are pretty ignorant. Like being able to understand the nuances of what makes something an interesting web protocol design, and decentralized versus centralized versus censorship resistant versus distributed, and the concepts that you learned in Bitcoin, they are useful in that world, but they're not perfectly translating. And I see some problems there with Nostr. Like, you have Bitcoin maximalists, and now you have Nostr maximalists. And Nostr maximalism is not a virtue in the way that Bitcoin is. It's like you're just saying, like, you really subscribe to a certain specification of how to connect peers on a network, and just that's just not something to be terribly passionate about. It's not a culture, and people have made it into a culture, and they've made it into part of their identity. And so now it's like, anti-Twitter, pro-Nostr, this is freedom, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, like, Nostr is not an evil thing. It's not a bad thing. It's an interesting, project and interesting technology. And there's a lot of parallels to what we were trying to do. But they made a lot of trade-offs so that they could make it easier for web developers. And so what they basically ended up with is websites that don't have UIs. And so, which they call relays. And so relays are just websites, except when you visit them, you don't get a picture, you don't get an interface to click on, you just get the data. And now you need to bring your own website, which is what a Nostr client is, like Damus or I don't know, Primal or these other ones. So it's like now everybody that knows, every web developer can now act like a builder. Not act, but they can feel like more of a builder, because they're not just making a website now, they're making an app. And their app isn't just like their website app isn't just content that they're hosting, it's content that comes from somewhere else. And this is interesting. There are good parts of that design, but it is not really very censorship resistant, and it is not really it's pretty much inevitable that it will centralize significantly over time. And there's a lot of inefficiency in how they handle relays, and they can keep working on it and keep making it more, more and more. I used to tell them when I bothered talking to them, I don't anymore. I used to tell them, you guys are just building slash tags backwards. You're just starting at the end, and then you're going to go back and realize all the things you skipped and fix them. And then we're both going to end up, making the same thing in the end. But you can't, because they've made it part of their identity and their culture, you can't debate them on anything. It's just, oh, this guy's just a hater. This guy only cares about his thing. He's just talking his bags. And it's like, this isn't an investment. This is like, it's an investment in time, I guess. And I guess it's an investment in money by the people who pay for what we're making. But it's not like you shouldn't be invested in the protocol. You should just be thinking, what problems is it solving for you, and why does that make you excited? And the truth is, most people don't have censorship problems. And so, but now Nostr is expanding beyond that to be like that it's not just about social media, and that's fine too, but they're eventually going to have to solve all the problems that we're trying to solve too. And everybody's going to have their own flavor of how they solve it. What matters in the end is how many people you actually help. Do I think people are being helped on Nostr? I guess people that got banned from Twitter maybe, but I don't know. More Twitters is not really what the world needs, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right, John, listen, great to talk to you. It's been far too long, and let's not wait so long next time.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold you to having me back when we actually are releasing a product again. Then I'll be able to talk more probably about. We're just in stealth about some things. And so it's just, I've mostly ranted about my opinions here instead of our technology. But
that's what I wanted.
Okay, good. So the next time.
After that much time, that's what I wanted.
I'll show more.
I wanted a bit of guidance. Well, listen, you got an open invite. Whenever you want to come on, you can always come on. It's not a problem. You just reach out to me or Danny. We'll make it happen. Do you still want to send people? Do you want to repeat all the places to send people?
Sure. I'm John Carvalho, CEO at Synonym. You can follow me on Twitter at Bitcoin Error Log, using the same handle on Telegram if you want to chat. We have some chat rooms as well for the different products. I can link you to later. The websites are basically, they all end in .to. And so it's bitkit.to, blocktank.to, synonym.to, and slashtags.to. The slashtags brand will be changing because we had some trademark issues. So I don't know for sure what that will be, but that will change. Yeah, so check out the websites, try the app, and come troll me on Twitter.
Wicked. All right, well, listen, we'll stick that all in the show notes, but I appreciate having you on, John. Been way too long. Thank you, man.
Thanks for having me.
Can't wait for it to come out in beta out of beta next year, because I did play with it over in Prague, and it's pretty fucking cool. All right, man. Peace out.
Bye. Thanks.